Well, good morning. My name is Alex Fernandez. I'm the pastor here at the Heritage Hill campus, one of the pastors here at Cornerstone Church. So glad to have you joining us online. If you're present here today, special treat for you. As mentioned, we have a cookout right after the service, great menu. If you're a vegetarian, we have some plant-based options for you. I also have an ice cream food truck showing up here in a few to bless you. I even prayed and ordered the weather to be what it is today because so many people complained. And so if you're looking at just getting out of here and running out, calm down. Slow down for a little bit today. Enjoy the food, enjoy some time, get to know some people today, and that's all free. And so if you're visiting, picked a great weekend to be here as we bless you with that here this morning. Have you ever jumped into something or looked at something and thought, well, that sounds easy, and then when you started and you got into it, you realized, wow, that's a lot harder than I thought it was going to be? I think I had that view of parenting, when I was younger. You see kids throwing tantrums in the store, and you thought, I'm never going to have kids do that, or my kids will always eat their veggies when they're told. My kids will always say please and thank you. And then I became a parent, and I realized that none of that was true. And so the same is true of love. And when I say love, we're going to talk about that specifically today. Because on the surface, as we talk about love and use that word over and over in the church, that word can make it sound like something, that's easy to do. Or at least it sounds easy. I had some flashbacks as I was working on this message this past week of just those moments where it was easy to love and you're filled with love. I had some flashbacks of when my daughter, who's now 27, was a little girl and she loved to just play on the swing. And I remember taking her to parks and whatnot, and just the joy of hearing her say, "Daddy, higher." And she was one of those kids who was a thrill seeker. And as I continued to push and the squeal of excitement, those things just brought joy in my heart and smiles on the faces of the people around us. Some of the kids were wondering why their parents weren't doing those kind of things. But that kind of love is easy. That kind of love that you feel for your child, that isn't something you have to force. You don't have to be patient in that. You don't have to be gentle around that. That kind of love flows naturally. But choosing to love people outside of your intimate circle, that's where love looks different. And so welcome to week 3 of our series called The Other 167. Throughout this series, we have been talking about, then the 167 is really referencing the 168 hours we have in our week. And so often when we think of the word worship, our mind thinks about what we're doing right now. The 1 hour that we come, we gather, and we turn our hearts and our spirits towards God. And we've talked about that in our series, that the gathering is important. That's not to naysay what the purpose of this is. But it's to help us understand how this hour or so helps springboard us into the other 167 hours of our week where we can worship. And so we've been hitting different elements that we might not think about that are actually more intimate ways to worship God. Things like rest and Sabbath. We can worship God through rest by slowing down, to tell God, I trust you, and I'm gonna take time of rest because I can't do everything, but you can help me do all things. Or service, like we talked about last week. I see Mandy sitting in the crowd. She delivered a powerhouse message on how acts of service is actually imitating Jesus, and that is worship. In fact, as we started off the series, we talked about worship being the love or adoration or the devotion of something. It could be honestly anything, and often we worship idols. But true Christ-following worship is when we imitate Jesus. When we reflect the image of God back to God, that is the ultimate act of worship, the imitation of Jesus and the reflection of God. And so today we're going to see how Jesus asked us to do just that in a different way. And it's probably the hardest act of worship that we can possibly do. In fact, I might even say it feels impossible. And there's a reason for that. We'll get to that. This is a concept that we have to learn and try to understand. And so in the time of Jesus, as he was teaching, and as people were listening and sitting at his feet, and religious leaders had their ear pointed towards Jesus, trying to understand his teachings that perhaps were contrary to his. One time, one of the Pharisees, that is the religious teachers of the law, came to Jesus and asked Jesus what might seem like a simple question. And he simply asked, Jesus, which is the greatest of all commandments? These are people who studied the law, just invested in everything of their being, trying to understand the law being the scriptures of God, and which one of these are the ones that need to be most followed? Which one is the most important? That's what he was trying to ask Jesus, trying to understand as Jesus was talking about love and those other types of things. And Jesus brings it back to some Old Testament principles. These are found in the books of Deuteronomy and Leviticus. Jesus pulls out this statement in Matthew chapter 22. He says, well, to answer the question, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and the greatest commandment. And the second one is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now, on the surface, it might seem like Jesus cheated a little bit because he was asked which one is the greatest, and actually Jesus answers, there's actually two. And I'm going to reveal to you that in this text, there's really three. We'll get to that in a second. But Jesus answers in this way, but he connects them together. And why did Jesus put these two texts together? To understand and comprehend what he's talking about, we have to understand the type of love that Jesus is talking about in these texts. We've done this before, and we've talked about it in church, and I hear pastors talk about this all the time. You know, there's different types of love that you find in the New Testament writings. In the Greek, there's phileo. Phileo is brotherly love. That's where we get the word Philadelphia. There's storge, which is kind of a familial kind of love, a gathering and community kind of love. Eros, which is kind of a romantic love. This text is actually the most commonly used type of love. And maybe if you've been around church, you've probably heard this. This is agape love. Agape simply means unconditional love. And I kind of hate when we use in the Greek, these are the words. Because it normally flies over the head of the listener, and often we use these as, sometimes preachers use these as a way to like prop yourself up, like I know this, and it honestly is kind of useless. As I looked at this week, I don't even know why we do this. You know how many times the word eros shows up in the New Testament? None. Storge? None. Phileo 25 times. The overwhelming presence of the word love in the New Testament, specifically through the words of Jesus, is agape love. We don't need to learn what all the other types of love are. That's my point with this. The type of love that Jesus is talking about throughout his teaching that is found over and over in the writings of Paul and every other New Testament writer is overwhelmingly the word agape love, which is the unconditional, no requirements, no strings attached, no limit kind of love. This is the kind of love that God gives and gives us before we even ask for it. This is the kind of love that is expressed through God sending his son into the world on our behalf, that while we were still sinners, God sent his son into the world because he loved us unconditionally, no requirements kind of love. Strangely, this is not the kind of love that Christians are known for in our world. In fact, Barna did a study not too long ago, and it revealed these four stats. 7 out of 10 non-Christians have a negative view of Christianity in the church. 21% of those polled had a negative view of church in general. 28% said they do not trust their pastor in their local community. That one hurts. The words that kept coming over and over as non-Christians were asked to describe who Christians are were hypocritical, judgmental, and get this, non-loving. If anything that Christians should be known for, if there's anything that should be our identity, it is love. If we are supposed to be imitators of Jesus, who is the embodiment of love, why do people have this view of Christians? One of the researchers summed it up this way. He said, perhaps many churchgoers appear confused about the teachings of Jesus. This is in sharp contrast to what we see in the first century. In the first century, followers of Jesus were called Christians first at a place in Antioch. This is 10 years after the resurrection of Jesus, where that term Christian came up. The term Christian means little Christs, imitators of Jesus. This was a derogatory term in the first century. There was such a foreign way that people were living in a type of unconditional love that they were expressing in the first century in Palestine and into Turkey and into Europe, that there was something that so rare that the people in those communities had to identify these people, and they called them Christians. You are little Christians. You live in such a strange way. It was meant to be a derogatory term. Christians in the first century didn't call themselves Christians. They called themselves followers of the way. The way of the teachings of Jesus. There was an implied understanding that you apply the teachings of Jesus in your life and you live in a way that is in many ways very countercultural. And I think hungry for our world today. Today, Christians struggle to put this into practice. Often Christians are known for their criticism or their judgment or their tough love. And we get this image. Are you offended by that image? Who are you offended by? If you're offended by that image of Christian, I know a lot of Christians. It's not my view of Christians. Perhaps we should be offended by those who are representing our Christianity. This is what love is and what love is not. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. As we see the word love in here, think the word unconditional as we laid it out. Paul writes, love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with truth. How many of you guys had that read at your wedding? Anybody? It has nothing to do with marriage, by the way. But it's a beautiful verse. It's giving us an image of what love is. And when people hear that, they don't have to be a Christian to figure out whether they have received that kind of love from Christians or not. I think one of my greatest pet peeves, I don't know if I have one greater, is to see Christians act in an unloving way in our world. Gets under my skin. I have been wrestling with this probably for the last 5 to 7 years. I've tried to not have it affect me. I've gotten upset over it. I've responded harshly in response to that sometimes. And what I've come to realize is that I can't control what other people do, but I can control what I do. I can control the narrative of who I am. I can't control the narrative of who other people paint themselves to be. And so I've tried to commit myself to love as deeply and widely and as much as possible to change the narrative in the circle that I'm in. Because that is an act of worship. In fact, worship is someone experiencing the love of Jesus through me. This is another example of how we can actively worship God in our 167 hours in our week. That my interaction with someone and they're experiencing the unconditional love of Jesus through me is an act of worship. If I am an imitator of Jesus and they experience Jesus through me, it is such a deep act of worship. What if we love like that? What if that became the narrative of Christians in our world? What if that just became the narrative of this church body or Cornerstone in general? I think for the people who've encountered Cornerstone and its people, I think that is the narrative. But there's some loud voices out there. And I'm not talking about just random acts of kindness. I'm talking about love that is patient, love that is encouragement, love that is grace-filled, act of worship kind of love. Imitators of Jesus kind of love that flows through you. And when we do that, they encounter the living God. They see the very image and character and face of God through us. My favorite verse in all the Bible is 1 John 4:8. It's so simple. I don't know if you know it. It goes like this. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. I think that sums up the gospel in one short verse. Whoever does not know love does not know God, because God is love. Notice it doesn't say God shows love. It doesn't say God has love. It doesn't say God bestows love. God is love. It is this very essence. It is this character. It is at the core of the DNA of God, that God is love. And so when we reflect that in our lives, and when we show that kind of love to others around us, guys, there's no greater act of worship. This kind of worship is not easy. This is the kind of love that chooses to love beyond comfort and obligation. This is the kind of love that welcomes, that forgives, that serves others, especially when it's inconvenient. This kind of worship is the deepest level of worship that we can offer. The question is this. This is the question we can ask ourselves. Are you allowing God's love to flow through you in such a way that others experience Jesus through you? That's a convicting question. The first command is to love. Love God. And when we hear that, I think, oh, that's easy. I do love God. I love God. But how is that expressed? This is where Jesus connects these two sentences together. Because again, I think we can oversimplify the first commandment. Do you love God? Of course I love God. That's easy. My heart, I love God. I'm here. Look, I'm here. I sing songs. I read the Bible. I love God. How do we express the love of God? This is the second part of the verse. Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself. If you want to show me you love me, this is how it's expressed. Love your neighbor as yourself. When I heard that verse growing up as a kid, I often found that to be such a strange verse, because I thought everybody loves themselves, don't they? And then as you grow up, you recognize there's things you don't love about yourself. And sometimes we can create a loathing because of the things we've done and the circumstances that we found ourselves in. Or the words people speak into us that become our identity, that aren't loving, and you all of a sudden develop this feeling inside of yourself, and you struggle to love yourself. As a pastor, I've talked to countless people who struggle with just loving themselves. I said in this verse, there's 3 instructions in this verse. Most of us see 2 in this one. One is love God, one is love others, but there is a command in here to love yourself. Did you see it in there? That's not in the Old Testament text. This is something that Jesus adds in here. Love your neighbor as yourself. First, you have to practice love of yourself. And this is where we begin to understand what we were talking about in the beginning. The kind of love, the unconditional love that God has for each and every one of us. Again, that while we were still sinners, God loved us and sent his son into this world for us on our behalf as an atonement for us. God loved us first. And so love yourself. He loves you unconditionally. If you needed to hear that, just that this morning, receive it. You are loved. But let's get back to this love your neighbor stuff, because this is where it gets hard. Loving your kid on a swing, easy. Maybe even loving yourself. Maybe you check that box off. Loving God, but now Jesus is adding the second part of this text. Love your neighbor as yourself. What does the love of neighbor mean? What is that all about? And as he's asked the same question, it's again Pharisee, religious leaders who are struggling with the Old Testament law and trying to apply it. And they are convinced this does not obviously include lepers. This does not obviously include tax collectors in their day. This does not obviously include sinners. They're trying to understand the context of what Jesus is talking about when he talks about neighbor. And then Jesus goes into the famous story of the Good Samaritan. I'm not going to retell the whole story, but if you don't know the story, there's a man, a Jewish man in the story that gets beat up and he's left by the wayside, left for dead. And Jesus tells a story of three people who walk by. One, we'll just call him a pastor. A pastor walks by, sees the man, walks the other side of the street and continues to go on his way. Another one, another religious person who's walking down the street, sees the man. The first two examples were Jewish men in the example of the story. Sees the man, goes across the street. You know how much it takes to go to see somebody in need and to walk across the street? You understand what Jesus is stressing in this story? The ugliness that's in this story, that they see somebody who is left for dead, beat up by robbers, so the person walks across the street to continue on in their day. And then the plot twist in the story that Jesus would say that the person who stops is a Samaritan. Who's a Samaritan? A Samaritan is simply somebody in that day. The Jews and the Samaritans were neighbors. Physical neighbors, literally like, where are we? Grand Rapids, Walker. Grand Rapids, Cascade. Grand Rapids, pick a suburb. Like this is where you live. Your neighbors are around you. And the Jews and the Samaritans did not get along. They had no love lost for one another. The Samaritans, just for understanding, had Jewish roots and ancestry. But when the Syrians invaded in centuries before, they married with the Jewish people and they became a half-breed people in the eyes of Jews. They worshiped the same God. They had many of the same religious practices, but they weren't the same. And so this created conflict and mistrust and hatred and just a vileness about how they looked at one another. So they were enemies. They weren't at war, but there was no love loss. And what a plot twist that in the story, as Jesus explains the love of neighbor, he says, you know who came along and helped the guy? It was a Samaritan. Mic drop. Every ear perked up. And in this story, Jesus is making them and he's making us, every time we hear that story, rethink who we love. To reframe neighbor as everyone. Everyone means everyone. The people we would walk by and maybe even across the street to avoid. The people who we have no compassion in our heart for. The marginalized. The people that some Christians in this world are vilifying. The people that some Christians in this world are calling our enemy. That wakes us up this morning, doesn't it? The people that can't help themselves. I serve on the board of Dégagé, which is one of our homeless community partners here in our city. And there's a crisis going on right here in our city, but across our globe, but specifically in our country, in how the homeless are being treated and how we are going after the problem of helping people who have mental illness find care, how people are in need can find shelter. We have some opportunities coming up this fall. We haven't disclosed them yet, but I'll leak them now. There is active work going on between our community partners, Dégagé, Mel Trotter, Family Promise, of how churches can come alongside this fall and help and be part of the solution. Dégagé and Mel Trotter have picked a niche. Mel Trotter is focused on helping men find permanent housing. Dégagé is focused on women finding permanent housing, and they have solutions and programs that help people find that, but there's still a crisis of the daily need of homeless people here in our community to find shelter, to have food, to find care, to have basic things and resources, and to make them easy to find and to help. And so some community churches right here in the downtown area, 5 of them, Cornerstone, one of them, are stepping into an initiative to partner and to provide daily shelter care. And so there's some volunteers opportunities this fall that we're going to be presenting to you. I hope that the Cornerstone people not just step forward in donation of money, but also in donation of time to care for the homeless population here in our city. There's going to be some serving opportunities at the Open Door Bakery, which is Dégagé's bakery that they have on the corner to raise funds for their ministry. And they've asked area churches to help staff that and asked Cornerstone to do it at the most strange times, Sunday morning, like right now. Do you have volunteers who would be willing to do that? Yeah, I bet I do. And you know what they said? We'll actually put the TV on in the Open Door Bakery as people come in to grab some sweets and some sandwiches and coffee and whatever. We'll have the TV on there. It'll stream the Heritage Hill campus worship service, and so the people won't miss that time. And you know what my thought was? There is no greater act of worship that you could do with that hour of your day than to be there than instead of here. You can clap. Yeah, I know you want to clap. That's Tracy. Love your neighbor as yourself kind of worship. But then Jesus takes it one step further, as he always does. Because we can even find a heart of compassion for that kind of neighbor. Verse 44, he says, "But I tell you also to love your enemies and pray for anyone who mistreats you." And in John 14:15, as his disciples are trying to understand all of the stuff he's unpacked here, Jesus finishes off the thought in another book. He says this, "If you love me, you will obey what I command." All these examples. Jesus is not just suggesting a better way to live. He is announcing a revolutionary way to worship by loving our enemies. Before I move on from that and wrap up, let's address what love is not. Love is not accepting evil. Love is not denying justice. Love is not enabling abuse. Okay, don't get confused. It does not require us to remain in hurtful situations or be hurt by others. It does not pretend that hurt does not exist. But what Jesus is calling us to is something more than emotion, more than a feeling. He's calling us to make a choice. And this is hard. I can think of countless ways where I've been tested in this in my life. Let me just give you a couple examples as the band comes up to help us close. You probably have had similar experiences. We had family dysfunction in our family. I've talked about it before. And there was betrayal and there was hurt that a family member caused my parents. And that was a season of great struggle for me to try to exhibit this kind of love. Because when somebody you love is hurt, that's the time where your instinct is to turn away or to cut off or to respond with unlove. And it took me a long time to work through that. I don't think what Jesus is asking us to do here is to just try to change your heart in those moments where you're struggling to love somebody who's unloving around you. I think that takes time and it takes practice. But I found that through forgiveness and trying to practice this kind of love, the weight of that experience was lifted off of me over time. To show grace, to offer forgiveness when it wasn't merited, to mend a relationship that was broken. This is what Jesus is talking about, is this kind of deep, unconditional love. Not to remain in hurt, but to repair the hurt. I've had times in the last 12 years as a pastor of this church where people of the church have left the church or hurt me in ways where I didn't even recognize why they were hurting me. And those kind of things are hard to deal with. And in those times, you have to have an extra amount of grace for people. Perhaps for you, it's having patience for a coworker that undermines you all the time. Or offering help to a neighbor who you know is a gossip. Or forgiving a friend who's betrayed you. Each moment is an opportunity for someone to see Jesus through you. And the challenge is it's against every instinct in our bodies to practice this. I said in the beginning, this is perhaps the hardest thing that Jesus will ask us to do, and in some ways it may seem impossible, and that's because it is. It is not in our DNA to love in this capacity. It is not something we are wired with to do on our own. Paul sums it up this way in Galatians 2:19. He says, "For through the law, I died to the law so that I might live for God. I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. Therefore, I do not set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness could be gained through the law, Christ died for nothing." In other words, this kind of love only comes from the creator of this kind of love. From the existence and the being of the God of unconditional love. This kind of love is only possible through the transformation of our heart and our spirit and our mind and our body, that we would be transformed so much like Christ that we would die to ourselves and become the embodiment of Christ. That's the only way this is possible. To show unconditional love at the level that Jesus shows is to allow the Spirit of God to work in you, to change our heart, and to transform you from the inside out. So this is what flows from us. If we rely on ourselves, it is impossible. If it comes from Christ, it is possible. So here's the challenge. Here's a challenge you can practice this week. Look for a moment this week to practice unconditional love. Trust me when I say you will not have a hard time finding an opportunity. There's going to be countless opportunities where showing this kind of unconditional, undeserving, unmerited love is going to present itself. And before you get there, pray every morning, each and every morning, wake up and pray this. Invite Jesus to live through you in that day. Pray for a patience beyond understanding. Pray for the type of grace that you were offered and an opportunity to show that type of grace to somebody else. Pray for the courage to put your pride aside and respond in a loving way when you have been shown something that is unloving. Pray that you have an opportunity and the boldness and the ability to lead with love this week. to somebody who the world is not loving, to somebody who maybe doesn't deserve the kind of love that they're showing you. And I promise you, if you do that, something powerful will happen. It will not just be an interaction you have with somebody. It will be an act of worship. Because worship is someone experiencing Jesus' love through me. So let me pray over that here as we close. Father God, we just lift up our hearts. So Lord, we just, this is hard. I wish you didn't say this kind of stuff, but you did. And I'm sure for some of us in the crowd, we are listening to this and we're thinking, but you don't understand this person and they've tried. Lord, may we have a spirit to respond with grace. Lord, you commanded us to do this. It's not a suggestion. It's an act of worship. And so may we just take some time for some self-reflection and the ways that perhaps we unlovingly responded in the world this past week. To the people that we often care about the most, sometimes it's those people that we hurt and show the lack of love. So maybe, Lord, there's an opportunity this week to respond differently, to mend that. Maybe there's somebody here, Lord, who's feeling the test of patience for somebody at work, at school, in traffic. Lord, just let us see those opportunities and respond as you would respond. Lord, let us have our eyes and ears open for the people who need love the most in our world, the people who are being hurt in our world, who are being demonized in our world, who are being pushed aside in our world, who are being marginalized in our world. May we have a heart, not only a heart of compassion, but eyes to see, to respond in a loving way this week. Would you prompt our heart? And may we turn our spirit of love towards you. May the ultimate reflection of you, may our imitation of you bring you the honor and the glory and praise to your name that you rightfully deserve, that I can raise the name of Jesus high. Lord, let this be our opportunity to worship you in a different way this week. As we walk out of this building this day, as we continue on in our day, as we're not ready for some of the things that we'll face, Lord, may this be the posture of our heart. And it's in those moments that we turn to you, Lord, and may we reflect the image to you. In your name we pray. Give us the strength. Give us the ability of something we can't do. It can only be done through you. It's in your name that we pray.